to us. It's as simple as that. Now, this hour, we're going to be in the company of Zara Mohammed. She's Secretary-General of the Muslim Council of Britain, and she's come down all the way from Glasgow, specially for this. So I'm really honoured that you've done that, Zara. Thank you very much indeed. There's so much to talk to you about. I mean, we've got all the Nazgani thing that happened last week, and I'm sure that will come up. I'll talk to you about that, but there may be callers on that as well. But I really want our callers to dominate this hour because I think you're going to find it interesting what they have to say. Hopefully they'll find interesting what you've got to say as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text your question if you can't phone in to 84850. Well, first things first, what is the Muslim Council of Britain?
Well, thank you, Iain, for having me on this evening. You're absolutely worth the trip. And I believe we've bonded over a party conference in Glasgow.
Yes, we discovered that we both attended a Liberal Democrat conference in Glasgow about 10 or 15 years ago.
But the Muslim Council of Britain is the largest and most diverse umbrella representative body for Muslims in the country. What does that mean? That means we represent everybody from mosques, madrasas, charities, women's organisations, professional networks. It's a pretty big job and it's a pretty big umbrella. And I guess my role is taking on the leadership helm, bringing communities together, providing that community cohesion, but also working with wider society to see, how can we create a more prosperous and British society.
One criticism that people sometimes make of the Muslim Council of Britain is it's not very democratic, or it hasn't been, and that it's very much self-appointed.
Well, as the first woman, the youngest and the first Scot to have been elected in its history, I would argue that those democratic procedures certainly did us well in the election that I had to take part in. And I think I probably epitomise the complete opposite of a lot of those misconceptions. And maybe at one point thought, no way they're going to let me in. But the voters...
Why did you think that?
I think, with institutions, it's always, as a young person, I always saw this institutions are difficult to change. I've always been part of, the student scene and all the kind of, everything is really quick on the student side of things. But with institutions, they feel old and tired. And so I kind of thought, really, but I guess being part of the leadership team, people saw the track record. But also I think, 50% of British Muslims are under the age of 25. So wasn't it about time? 50% of us are women, so wasn't it about time? So I think it was probably with a good bit of wisdom and a bit of talent on my side, let's hope, and obviously my amazing Scottish accent that did the trick.
It's interesting, though, that I think the general perception is of mosques as being very male-dominated, and yet we now have a young woman in charge of the Muslim Council. Well, I say in charge, I don't know if you would describe it as being in charge, but you are the head of the Muslim Council of Britain. Do you think that is one thing that you want to do to change that perception?
Absolutely. I think the moment of my election, my life changed. And I think people were really curious to find out what did this mean, because ultimately it was imams and mosques that voted me in. And just today I visited a mosque in Newham and sat with the ladies there, and they were running the show, whether it was the funeral services or the food banks feeding 500 families a week. They were very much involved. And I think there's still plenty to do. There's plenty to go. But certainly I hope to be, a source of clearing up those misconceptions to see.
But why is it that when you see pictures of what happens in mosques, it is just men in what I would describe, coming from a Christian background, in the congregation? I don't know what the equivalent word is.
I think that's unfortunate with what the media chooses. Those photographs are taken and they don't reflect everybody that's involved in those mosques. And I think that's, for a lot of people who haven't met Muslims in Islam, they will turn to the tabloid paper or the story in the news, and that becomes a reference point. But I do hope to share the diversity of our communities, because we're not all South Asian. We're not. I'm third generation British Pakistani, so I think we're very diverse amongst ourselves. And our young people, they don't identify to a very strong cultural identity. They're changing themselves. So I think part of my role is to smash those misconceptions and those tropes, and I guess in some ways really showcase who we are, and that the role that we do play in Britain today.
So what are the main issues that you find yourself dealing with? Obviously, you've been on the media a lot over the last few days about what Nazgani said about why she was sacked. But that's presumably not your day-to-day bread and butter.
Yeah, that's what we call a crisis response situation. And there was a lot to do. I think fundamentally, when I took on this role, I was looking at, well, what are the big issues of our time? And I think, social mobility and deprivation is high. I know we've been talking about the rise in food prices, and Muslim communities across the UK, and particularly ethnic minorities, we're amongst 40% of the most deprived, and I couldn't even believe that 22% of people in the UK live in poverty. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of just the policy and advocacy work and social mobility. Muslim women are some of the most marginalised when it comes to employment. I have a law degree, and I know how hard it was to get a job, especially as a visible Muslim woman. One of my friends said, I could never wear that, Zara, because I would never get a job, So I think our issues are around, the policy and advocacy work and helping, strengthen that representation of Muslims in public life. I think it's about strengthening our own communities and working on some of our own issues, whether that is the inclusion of women or whether that is about, disabled communities and the marginalised minorities within our own groups. And then finally, I think it's about creating a Britain that is welcoming and inclusive of all of us. And I think, when we look to the future and we look at the politics of the day, people are losing a little bit of confidence as to what that looks like.
When your friend said that to you, and said I couldn't wear that because I wouldn't get a job, did that sort of almost reinforce your decision to continue wearing it, saying, well, I'm not going to have someone dictate to me what clothes I wear?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a feisty one, so and a bit headstrong.
I'm glad you said that word, because Jackie Smith always tells me I should never use that word, because I only ever say it about women. So
it's okay, we can say it. I think for me, it definitely strengthened my resolve, and I was president of one of the law societies. And I remember the day I put my headscarf on, I went to university, it was my second year of uni, and everybody was just a little bit strange. And there was one person in particular that just really didn't know what to do or how to interpret it. And I was just being myself. And, that was just part of my religious journey and a choice that I'd made. But it didn't change who I was as a human being and how I was going to behave towards others. And I think, at the end of the day, we should be confident to be who we are. And,
What do you say to people who say, well, OK, I respect everyone's desire to dress how they want to, but it is a form of othering in that it's not the traditional, or whatever the traditional dress of this country is. I don't particularly know, but it's not wearing a headscarf. And I should say for people who are listening, it's not the niqab. You're covering your hair, but your face is fully visible. Do you understand why some people have a bit of a problem with it?
I think people are scared of what they don't know, and they fear what they don't understand. And, if you talk to a Muslim woman, which I would argue most of them haven't, what exactly is it that, is threatening? I remember being in a conversation during this course of my tenure, and someone said, well, what are you doing about women's rights and oppression? And I said, well, some people believe I'm oppressed because I wear this. So whose definitions are we talking about? So I think it's really about those misconceptions, and, we, as women, we should have a choice to wear what we want to wear, and we should respect that. And I think this is part of my journey in faith, and I would hope that others would respect that. But, ultimately, we're here to be part of society. So it's not something to build a wall between us, but it's something to say, hey, I'm a little bit different, so are you, and that's to be celebrated.
What do you want to achieve? Do you have term limits on how long you can be?
So I'm halfway, I'm 50% in.
You're halfway.
I know. It's a 2-year term, but
Right.
I can run again if they want to elect me, So I could do 4 max. Before I came in, I guess a woman with a vision. So I knew okay, what do I want to see change? And I think when you get into a role, you realize how quickly time passes and how the opportunities can also pass. So for me, it's about, improving that inclusion, diversity, strengthening our institutions. But if I could be happy with anything, it would be the idea that after my tenure, I left people behind. I left the institution in a place where it was more diverse, where it was representative of the diversity of our communities, but also that I left a leadership team that would continue that good work. So it wasn't just time bound to the first women leader. And, that many other women are also inspired and confident to believe that they can do it too.
What are your frustrations about how the media in general covers Muslim-related issues? I suppose you could give a monologue for the next hour on this.
We could do.
But I know... I'm very conscious that when there's a terror attack, the almost automatic assumption is that it was conducted by somebody who comes from the Islamic background. Now, that is sometimes the case. It's not always the case, but it has been quite often the case over the past 10 or 15 years or so. Does it frustrate you that you are called upon to appear on the media, usually when there is some bad news story that is going around, whether it's sort of the rape gangs, the terror attacks, or sort of what's allegedly happened in Afghan? Do you think, oh, for goodness sake, there are so many good things going on, why aren't they getting reported?
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate. So we have the Centre for Media Monitoring in the MCB, and we did that analysis and found that, over 60% of the coverage is negative. And so for a lot of people, that really frames Muslims in a uniquely negative way. If the only story that you hear about Muslims is one to do with terrorism or Islamophobia, it's very negative. And I think it's frustrating, comes with the job. So you know you're going to have to do it. And I think particularly with some of the issues that we saw last year, it brings a lot of anxiety to Muslim communities. Like, here we go again. Are we all going to be brushed in the same way? And that's not our faith. That's not. So I guess in some ways, I also use the opportunity to say, well, we can completely condemn these actions, and these people don't represent our religion. So I guess that is important to do as well.
But it's a real dilemma, this one, because I know when I've been on air, when there have been terror attacks from Islamist terrorists, I've made a point of opening up the phone lines and saying, look, this is your chance to tell me what you think as a Muslim. And of course, you get lots and lots of people calling in saying, well, this is not my Islam, this has nothing to do with me, blah, 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 and almost apologising. And like it's, well, there's no need for you to apologise. It clearly wasn't you. But there's still this idea that among some people that think, well, there must be a little bit of sympathy because they're all Muslims. I mean, that's what it comes down to for some people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, our faith is very clear that, just to kill one human being, is to kill all of humanity. So these are, murderous, treacherous, evil people. And I think, last year marked 20 years since the war on terror and 9/11. You think back on it, and I can see why Muslim callers are almost apologetic, because in some ways it's ingrained. And I think it's very difficult for us in that very hostile climate to always be associated, the perpetrator is doing this in the name of Islam, when we would say, well, that's not Islam, and often they've got a mental health issue or they weren't even part of the community. So I think it is a really tricky one for us, but it's down to us to continue to challenge it, and for, I guess, wider society to see, Muslims are everyday people too.
I remember being in a meeting with Michael Howard when he was Tory party leader, and it was after the 7/7 attacks, and I was working for David Davis at the time, who was Shadow Home Secretary, and we were all sat around a table in the Leader of the Opposition's office, and the equivalent of you then, kept saying, well, of course, this is outrageous, and then would say, but. And in the end, Michael Howard slammed his fist on the table and said, there is no but. And he said, this is part of the problem, that if you keep saying but, people imagine that somehow, and I said, I know you don't sympathise with this at all, but too often the impression is given that you do. Now, you are a very different person from that generation, I think. And I think you can articulate these things in a way that they probably couldn't.
Well, I have my charms, certainly.
We can tell.
I think, I do represent a new leadership and a bit of a change to that. And of course, I wasn't in those rooms and in those moments. And I know that Muslim communities were under a lot of
You would have been
pressure.
about 3.
I was going to say to you, I was probably, pretty young. So I can't account for that, but I can say that unequivocally, there really is no but. And it's a clear thing, as it is, as clear as day, as they say. So it's a challenging. I think Muslim communities have had a really hard time, and in our history and landscape. And one thing, it's our 25th anniversary as the MCB, and one of the questions is, well, Zara, what's the vision for the next 25? I was like, well, give me a minute, let me just get to terms with this. And I think that's the whole point, isn't it? What does the future look like, and how do we move on?
We're going to open up the phone lines now, take some calls in a moment. And I think this is an opportunity, if you are from the Muslim faith and you've got questions about the Muslim Council of Britain yourself, give us a call. Zara's here to take your calls. And if you're not of the Muslim faith, maybe you want to know a bit more about it. Maybe you've got questions which nobody's ever answered. Well, now's your chance. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Hi.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
21 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're with Zara Mohammed, who's Secretary General. It's a grand title, isn't it? Not General Secretary, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. 0345 6060973 if you'd like to ask her a question. Nadria is in Brent. Hello, Nadria. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Iain.
Hi.
I'm calling from Brent, and I just would love to ask Zara Mohammed if the Muslim Council of Britain still hold anti-Ahmadi Muslim sentiment, as they have a history of dismissing Ahmadiyya Muslims as Muslim, which extremist Muslims do, Salafists, Wahhabists and others.
Well, that's a good opening question.
Yeah, well.
Sorry for going
No, not at all. No,
Straight in there, I think. Yeah, straight in. Well, I'd be happy to answer that question. Well, thank you for the question. And let me offer the clarification. You know, the MCB does not advocate for any intolerance or discrimination. You know, we're absolutely against that. With the particular matter of Ahmadiyya community, you know, this is a theological one. And that is that to be a Muslim, you know, the definition of to be a Muslim is, number one, belief in one God, and number two, the finality of prophethood. So obviously with the Ahmadiyya community, there is a difference in that belief, and therefore, just as the MCB can't represent the Ahmadiyya community, nor can the Ahmadiyya community represent, you know, the Muslim Council of Britain. So this is just a point of theology, which is
But if they call
accepted.
themselves Muslims, why? I mean, what is the difference?
It's based on theology. So with the Ahmadiyya community, there's belief that there is another prophet after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So whereas for us, that is the finality of prophethood. So you can't really move beyond that, and that's where the differential is. So within the Quranic understanding of who is a Muslim, what is Islam, that is belief in one God, monotheism. Number two, the finality of the prophet, with Muhammad, peace be upon him, being the final prophet. In the Ahmadiyya community, there is another prophet after, and then so that's where the difference of opinion is, and the difference of belief, and that's where the tension is.
Which, Nadria, to be fair, if you look at the Christian faith, there are all sorts of different strands of Christianity, and you don't expect one part of Christianity to represent another, do you?
Like, in Christianity, it's all like there's different factions. You've got Mormons, you've got so forth. So my issue is just with Muslim Council. They are Muslim, Ahmadiyya Muslims are Muslim, and if you're going to use the Muslim label, please represent all and not be sectarian. That's all I'm asking.
I mean, you presumably represent both Sunni and Shia strands.
So
if you can do that, why can't you include a strand for Ahmadiyyas?
Because it's just based on the definitive textual. This is scripture, so this is not something that there's any flexibility on. You know, this is a scholarly kind of religious that you can't have another prophet after the final one. And if that is the core of your belief system, then that's really it. So we only represent our members, you know. So this is something beyond even Muslim Councils of Britain. You know, this is Muslims, Muslim world. You know, this is a wider
But
issue.
do you not feel the need to modernise? I mean, even the Catholic Church is gradually updating some of its very deeply held long-term historical views on some social issues. Now, I know clearly there's a difference there.
Yeah.
There is a difference, but I think what Nadria is getting at is that there needs to be a bit more of a modern approach, a bit more of an inclusive approach.
I think perhaps another way of looking at it, it's like saying, you know, believe in two gods, not one. You know, so that's kind of the level of what I'm talking about. It's not an inclusion issue of, you know, women or, you know, a specific ethnicity or culture. I think what I can say to Nadia, though, is, you know, I'm completely against the discrimination that the Ahmadiyya community face, the hatred, the intolerance, the abuse, the vilification, you know. So I can say that, but ultimately this is a scriptural, a theological point, and it's too serious for it to be a point of we should include everybody, because this is what we believe and we're open about that belief system.
Kay has texted, it's not, this is going back to the conversation we had about the media. She says, it's not due to the media. I feel Friday prayers are male dominated. It's observing all the men going to prayers, not a mixed group as you might see going to a church, etc. We have a few mosques in Watford. What would you say to Kay?
Well, I often go to Friday prayers, so perhaps he's not seen the ladies.
But are you? I mean, again, I'm thinking of all the pictures
kind
that
of
I've seen
visual.
with the visual thing where there's all the prayer mats and there's the praying. It's all men.
Well-
You don't do that if you go to Friday prayers, do you? Not in the main bit of the mosque.
Well, we have our own. We'll have the ladies area. What I would say is that
Again, modernise.
we're still praying. The thing with Friday prayers is it's compulsory on men, so it's not actually. So that's why men in their troves will all congregate. But I can understand that perception is there, that, you know, where are the women, where are the others. We're certainly there, but it's
but
compulsory.
not visible. But you see, again, I don't know how to put this best, but I suppose it's the way that society has developed over the decades in this country, and it's clearly not the same in every country, I get that, but we are talking about Britain, and it seems incongruous to split men off from women. I mean, we see some of these political meetings. I remember was the 2015 election where Tom Watson got into awful trouble because he was addressing a meeting where the women were sat on the left and all the men were sat on the right. That is not modern Britain.
I think what I would say is that, you know, number one, the MCB, we host an annual Visit My Mosque Day. And I think go see for yourself, right? Go in, have a look. There are what you could say procedural issues in terms of where the women pray, where the men pray, you know, and those are related to faith. But in terms of men and women working together, I mean, the East London Mosque is a fantastic example of, you know, there's a whole wing, you know, dedicated to women, thousands of women, you know, fill, and they're doing classes, they're doing courses, they're working with the men on different food banks and relief projects. You know, there is a real teamwork, and the mosque I was talking to you about earlier today in Newham, you know, the men came and sat with us in the meeting, you know, while I was sharing what's it like to be the Secretary General of the MCB. So I think those misconceptions are there, but certainly, you know, why not go have a chat in the mosque and find out, go see the women, go meet them and have a look. And understandably, I can see that visualization, maybe, you know, we've got to do a bit more, but hey, I'm more than happy to welcome you.
Shuvik is in Eltham. Shuvik, hi, what would you like to ask?
Hello there. I'd like to ask about the MTV's view about the situation in Afghanistan. I've seen recently the reports from ITN and Sky News from Afghanistan. It's a really quite a grave situation there. So I mean, what does the MTV believe the British policy toward Afghanistan should be in terms of aid, getting aid to the Afghan people without helping the Taliban, and the issue of refugees as well?
Yeah, I mean, the situation is devastating. One of our affiliate members is Islamic Relief, who were directly on the ground. And, you know, they shared horrific stories of you know, poverty, of the children that are going hungry, but they're also delivering that aid. I think it's a very complex situation in terms of the government and you know, the setup. But certainly, you know, our affiliates, our charities, British Muslim charities are on the ground. They're delivering that aid. I think people, the government in particular, is definitely vested in helping resolve the situation in Afghanistan for a lot of reasons, including some of them being complicit in that situation in the first place. But no, I think we're totally support, you know, with the refugee communities. The MCB actually drafted a guide for mosques and communities on how to support Afghan refugees. And beyond that, we're looking at, I know some of them, or most of them, are still in hotels right now. We're looking at what happens when they're going to come into society, and how do we support mental health and trauma, integration, and some of those other issues that are bound to happen when you have a community that has come from, I guess, a war-torn country. So I think we're absolutely across it, but it's a very, very difficult situation. And I know it's...
And they are dispersed all over the country, because I think each local council has got a sort of quota to take, haven't they? And whether it's in the middle of rural Suffolk or the middle of Birmingham, you've got to adapt. And that cannot be easy. I mean, if you try and put yourself in, I know it's difficult, but if we all try and put ourselves in that position where you've effectively been ripped out of your own country that you've lived in for however many years, and then suddenly you land in Wymondham in Norfolk, I mean, that will be a shock.
Well, that's precisely what we heard. One of the councils in a very nice borough in London got 700 families. And they didn't know how to deal with it. And the council themselves were very confused. And, you know, these people have their own culture and customs and traditions and language barriers. So I think it's definitely going to be a very difficult issue. And I think we've still got more to see on how it plays out.
Well, we've got more to talk about over the next half an hour. Zara Mohammed from the Muslim Council of Britain is with us until 9 o'clock. 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, you can watch us on Global Player. It's 8:31. Serena Farrow has the LBC News headlines.
Boris Johnson says more job seekers need to fill vacancies to help ease the rising cost of living. The government's announced plans to withdraw support for universal credit claimants sooner to get 500,000 back in work by the end of June. A man's been jailed for 8 weeks and fined more than £1,000 for harassing Professor Sir Chris Whitty. 24-year-old Jonathan Chew pleaded guilty to intending to cause alarm or distress to England's chief medical officer. And the Prime Minister says claims he prioritised animals over people during the evacuation of Afghanistan is total rhubarb. He's again denied intervening to help charity Pen Farthing get his rescue animals out of Kabul. LBC weather clear for most of the UK tonight. A few showers, though, for the Northern Isles and a low of freezing.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:35. Zara Mohammed is with us. You can watch us on Global Player. And we've had some interesting calls so far. This next one is also quite a challenging one. Tina's in Archway. Hello, Tina.
Hello, Ian.
Hi.
I would like to, as a Soviet Muslim, I'm stressing Soviet Muslim, would like to ask Zara, what organization doing to bring Islam to the 21st century from the dietary point of view, clothing and the marriages? She knows what I mean by all these three aspects, which is definitely keeping a lot of representatives in the Western so-called, Western Muslim population very much backward.
Okay.
I do not recognize Islam which I practiced, my family practiced. Definitely not.
Well, it's a very interesting question. Zara, you, in a sense, personify a 21st century Muslim, but your organisation maybe does not. How do you drag it into the 21st century?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm as different as it gets. And, all of those 3 points, I think, look, everything is a work in progress, but it's also not to detract from the progress that has been made. We have young Muslim women across all fields, in politics, in business, in sport, in industry. We have young aspiring Muslim women who, have their eye, they don't feel that limitation that I can't, and I think there's absolutely a harmony. But what do we mean by modern, right? And I think there is a lot of misconceptions about, and this actually comes also from wider society, because when I was elected as the first female, the youngest and the first Scot, leader of the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, people questioned whether I was just a puppet, whether I actually had a voice, whether the men would let me lead. So I faced those same tropes, but at the same time, I am a practicing Muslim woman, who wears the headscarf, leading the largest Muslim representative body in the UK. So I think we're on track, and I think.
But do you have a sort of, to use a political equivalent, a sort of cabinet, a managing council that you have to report to? And you must, it is political, isn't it? And we know that in politics you have to be able to bring people along with you. And if you go too fast, that is often very counterproductive. So do you find that you are sometimes in a position where you have to bite your tongue because you would want to go further, but some of your colleagues are maybe slightly more conservative with a small c?
I think because I'm Scottish, I find it very difficult to restrain myself. And I'll be really honest. I've been in rooms with, very conservative individuals, and I'll just challenge them and say, look, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to change this? But I do it in a respectful way. But I think it's my responsibility to absolutely provide that challenge. And I really like what you said, Iain. It's about bringing people with you. So when I took this role, I knew who I was representing, but I also know the change that we need to see in our communities. And some of that includes talking about the environment, talking about poverty, talking about domestic abuse, talking about some of the challenges that we're facing. And at the same time, it's also being fair to the fact that, our mosques across the country have been feeding hundreds of thousands of people through this pandemic, or 40,000 Muslims are in the NHS in healthcare. Some of the first few people that died were Muslim doctors and nurses. So I think, when we look at Muslims in Britain, let's also look at what they're doing. But
just to pick up on what Tina said, she mentioned 3 things. Let's just look at attitudes to marriage, for example. Do you feel that the current attitudes to marriage and the Muslim faith are fit for the 21st century?
Absolutely. You should meet my friends. The men move to where they're at and live, look, Muslim women, we're working, we're earning, we're doing our own businesses, we've got our own YouTube channels, whatever it is, Yeah,
but there are fine, and I completely accept that. But there are many Muslim women and indeed girls who have marriages arranged for them with no input into them. And we've had to have new laws passed to prevent sort of 15, 16-year-old girls from effectively being trafficked back to Pakistan for an arranged marriage, or forced marriage, which they would have no choice in. And that still goes on today.
I would say that, look, those issues are there, but they're not the majority. They're not the mainstream.
No, of course they're not. But
they're not reflective.
But it would be good to have people speaking out against it.
And I would say there are. Naz Shah, MP, has been very vocal on this topic, rightly so, but also have, scholars, imams, who preach at the sermon saying, look, we don't forced marriage and arranged marriage. Not everybody's against arranged marriage, so I should offer that clarification, but forced marriage is completely unacceptable. And I think part of that change we need to see is the empowerment.
All right, well, let me take you on that, because I am against arranged marriage. I think it is an appalling thing in this day and age, and yet it is still a practice that's widespread, not just in the Muslim faith, it has to be said. How can you justify it?
Well, my parents had an arranged marriage, and they're still together, and it's not coercion. For part of it is rooted in tradition,
Have you never sat your mother down? She's probably listening, so maybe we'd better be careful what we say here. Actually, I'll take that question back because I don't want you.
I think we should be careful. Personal boundaries are really important here.
Yeah. No,
so
as soon as I said it, I regretted it.
Cup. But my point being is that they're not negative by their natural, they don't embody, a negativity when they're coerced, when they're against people's will, and that's why we use force. But many people in our communities have had arranged marriages and they're fine. And it's not just our communities, it's found in other places of the world, in other traditions, in other religions as well. And it's maybe more related to a cultural practice than a religious one.
Tina, thank you for that. Bushra, who's one of my favourite listeners, says, please tell Zara she's doing brilliantly with the challenging questions. Excellent role model for Muslim women in Britain. Really enjoying the show. Let's go to Munesh in Southall. Hello, Munesh.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, very well. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to just question the integrity of Zara and how challenging her role must be. Because on the one hand, you've got Boris Johnson, who's addressing women wearing the mask as letterboxes, and then you've got the imams who think that women are undervalued and don't have a role in life. And where's the balance? Where is your challenge? How are you going to deal with this to bring this across into mainstream society and express the Muslimness of where you feel Muslimness is going in the next future?
I'd never heard this word, Muslimness, before the Nazgani thing.
It's trending now.
It is now, isn't it? Yeah. Zara.
Yeah, thank you, Manish, for your question. Being the Secretary General of the MCB is not an easy gig, and there's certainly challenges. I think what you're talking about in some ways are the kind of the extreme sides, right, of the challenge, the kind of Islamophobia, the Islamophobic tropes, as well as some of that mentality that, does exist. But I think there's a whole bunch of people in between. There's a whole bunch of a space which I occupy, the mainstream, Muslims, your everyday people that drop the kids off to school and, are working and they're tired and they want to watch Netflix in the evening. I think there's the vast majority of Muslims are there, they're just doing normal stuff every day, trying to make ends meet, dealing with grief during COVID, their ultimate concern isn't that how are we going to sort all of these different things out? And that's what I try and reflect when I'm doing this leadership role, which is, are we really serving the real issues that normal everyday people are going through? And are we making sure that our institutions, absolutely, are inclusive and are reflective and responsive to those needs? The breakdown of the family, drugs, youth violence. There's loads and loads of issues that are common to all of our communities and come through cycles of poverty and a pandemic, right? People being faced with the redundancies. So I think I would say that I occupy a much bigger space than just those two. But there are challenges. And hey, 1 year into the job, I think I'm doing okay, hopefully.
When you read that article by Boris Johnson where he used the phrase letterboxes, bank robbers, what was your immediate reaction?
Oh, we're on radio. I mean...
yeah, it's not 9 o'clock yet either, so
what can
careful.
We say? Well, I'm a lady, so anyway. I mean, it was just vulgar and offensive and just demeaning and belittling, and I could go on and on and on, but ultimately, it's offensive. What people may not appreciate is, for a Muslim woman, when I decided to put my headscarf on, it was a journey in faith, My mother actually doesn't wear the headscarf. So this is a journey.
Now that's interesting, isn't it?
It is. So,
I mean, why?
That's just a choice that she took, For her, it didn't feel...
Well, you can reveal how that conversation went. What did she say when you said, look, I'm going to wear the headscarf? She
said, well, you better be responsible because know that when you put that on, you're going to represent something bigger than yourself. So make sure you treat everybody well and equally, and make sure you hold the dignity of what you're actually wearing, because it's an important symbol for us. It symbolizes for a lot of people the faith, but also... But
there's nothing in the Quran that says that you must wear a headscarf, is there?
The Quran does talk about women covering, and we'll go into another debate about that, but certainly there is a prescription for Muslim women to wear the headscarf, but also modesty is on the men too, so there's a different kind of hijab for the men. But ultimately, this was a journey of faith for me, and I think if the Prime Minister, if Boris is making comments like that, then, he's really trivializing and undermining Muslim women's choice and their connection to their creator and faith. So, and for many women, that had repercussions. And, we did see an increase in the number of Muslim women who wore the burqa, being attacked or verbally abused. Yeah.
Right. Munish, thank you very much for that. We've got 15 more minutes. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:49. Zara Mohammed, the Secretary-General of the Muslim Council of Britain, is with us taking your calls. A comment from Nora, who says, Iain, you may be light-hearted with your guest speaker, Zara, but as a British person, I'm disorientated that we're discussing the separation of women in a public place alongside arranged marriages and headscarves. This is all shocking to me, just as it should be. It's not a case of being light-hearted. I want to have a conversation where Zara has the opportunity to explain why she believes the things that she does and why her organisation stands for what it does. And then you have to make a judgment on that, I guess. Is there anything you want to add to that, Nora?
Yeah, I think at the same time...
Zara, sorry.
Oh, no,
Nora's the texter.
I think, we're human beings at the end of the day. So, it's about humanizing the conversation and being able to understand where we're coming from. We don't necessarily need to agree. And I think it's good for us to share our points of disagreement, but we have to find a way forward, ultimately. We have to have a conversation.
Right, let's go to Saeed in Watford. Hello, Saeed.
Hello, Iain. Hello, Sarah. Brilliant show, by the way, got to say. Basically, look, I'm a British Muslim YouTuber. My channel focuses predominantly on life as a British Muslim here in the UK. And the one question that I've definitely got for Sarah is that what are the MCB doing to help Muslim creators enter and be more represented in mainstream media nowadays? Because it's hard, to get into mainstream media without compromising on your beliefs and your principles.
Why is it hard? What do you have to compromise?
Well, for example, okay, I've had to turn down a lot of jobs because companies that will hire me are advertising alcohol, and they want me to video or create a commercial for a beer. Now, as a Muslim, not only I won't drink beer, nor will I get involved in actually advertising beer to be sold, for example, right? For example, any acting role, okay? So most of the acting roles that we get, either we're typecast as terrorists, all right, or basically somebody, in fact, one casting agent asked me, to do a kissing scene. Now, obviously, I'm a Muslim, and, I don't believe in, kissing anyone apart from my wife when she lets me.
Yeah, but if you're an actor, that's part of the job.
Well, not necessarily. You can still be an actor and not have to do any of that sort of stuff.
Well, it depends on what you're acting, I suppose. But if that is integral to a scene, then surely, you are acting.
Right.
It's not you doing it.
What if, okay, you're an actor, okay, and the only role that you can get typecast for because you're Asian and you're Muslim is a terrorist? How is that right? And how?
That isn't right.
It isn't right, exactly. So what I really want to know is how the MCB and what the MCB can do to support creators and artists like me to get into mainstream media.
Okay, thanks, Syed, for your question. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to a good friend who, like yourself, is in the creative industry and really struggled to get work. And for it's not a very stable industry as well, because you don't always know if you haven't made it in, it's tough to get in. And I know there are a lot of barriers to that, and some of that is in being typecasted. So I think certainly this is the MCB's 25th anniversary, and I think what we're really looking at is how do we create the opportunities for young people in our communities.
But don't you think Saeed is creating a barrier for himself there by saying he couldn't possibly do a scene where he's got to kiss somebody? If I was an actor, I'm gay, I would perfectly accept that I would have to kiss a woman. I might not like doing it, but I would do it. Now, okay, that's different from a faith, I suppose, but even so.
I understand where Saeed's coming from, and I think it depends on where you're at in faith, and if that's something really important to you, then I don't think it should be a barrier. I think there's always ways to work around it, and I'm sure we've had many a movie where you don't need to necessarily do that. You don't need to be kissing. There are plenty of movies, historical dramas, whatever else. I think the point Saeed was getting to is that it's very limiting on the kinds of roles that you can be casted for as a Muslim, as a Muslim man, as a Muslim woman, and often the entertainment industry. And I think that was what was really powerful about Netflix, is it just smashed the glass on all of it. You found in every movie it was really diverse. So I would say the MCB is absolutely committed. I'd be happy, Saeed, for you to get in touch with us and give us some recommendations and ideas. I don't think the MCB can claim to have all the solutions. And this is definitely a new space and a growing one. But as a young leader myself, I think, I was speaking to one of my colleagues and we're looking at tech and social media. Why don't we have a conference and bring together some brains around the table and see how can we explore that? So we're definitely interested. Drop us an email, get in touch, and let's see how we can work together, because I know there's plenty more people like yourself who want to make a difference through the creative industries too.
Saeed?
Brilliant. Yeah, no, without a doubt, Sarah, thank you so much for that. And I certainly will be dropping you an email. Trust me, I've got loads of ideas. You'll probably have
I think we can tell that.
Welcome to the team. We're still recruiting, so great. Join our volunteers.
Fantastic.
All right, Saeed, good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Just before we go to another caller, after 9 o'clock, we're going to be talking about International Holocaust Memorial Day. Is that something that, again, the MCB needs to engage in possibly a little bit more?
So we are engaging that, and I did join the live stream just before getting here en route in the taxi. But I think the Holocaust Memorial Day, over 6 million Jews, dying, the atrocity. And I mentioned today in my tweet as well, just saying, this is a trauma that we're still living. And we always say never again, but we're seeing genocide across the world still happening. So, myself, previous Secretary Generals have attended Holocaust Memorial Day ceremonies. And I think that's really important, that we don't lose sight of those lessons, but also that we stop killing each other. I think the genocides that are happening all over the world, whether it be in China, Rohingya, what humanity is that if we're still repeating the harms from the past?
Max is in Hounslow. Hello, Max.
Hey, guys. Hey,
Hi.
Ian. Hey, Zara.
Hi, Max.
So really just listening for the last 15, 20 minutes, what I want to say is, good luck. I'm hearing a lot of the questions coming your way, and, it seems like a pretty difficult situation you're in. But, I think education is the key here for Muslims, going back to our religion, educating ourselves correctly. And, and likewise for the callers coming in that maybe aren't Muslim, is also to educate themselves on certain matters. Iain made a comment there that he's kind of finds arranged marriages abhorrent. I'm in the process of getting an arranged marriage right now. My mum introduced me to a family member. They're Muslim. We have many things in common. I think Iain may mean forced marriages is what he's against, and forced marriages are not permissible in Islam. And if Iain educates himself on that, and the Muslims that do
I do know the difference.
Themselves,
but
then they will know not to practice enforced marriages either, because Islam says it's not permissible. And also around kind of modernising dress, modernising diet, modernising kind of Islam to the environment. Islam has covered all of these issues, and Islam has covered them perfectly. You come to the environment, to pick up a piece of litter off the street is something which brings you a reward. In a battlefield, you're not allowed to hurt the trees, let alone kind of carpet bombing cities indiscriminately. So if people go back and actually understand what true Islam is, I also don't get the fascination about Muslim women, why everybody's looking for them so hard. They are there, they are in the mosques. I think the Western world has a little bit of a fascination with trying to see Western women. They do go to mosques. They are in the mosques with men. But sometimes when you're looking so hard for something, you can't see what's in front of your face.
Okay, all right. Zara, I could respond at length to a lot of the things that Max has said there, particularly being introduced to a family member to marry, which, again, I'd struggle with.
So what's the question?
Let's pick that one out of it. I mean, he says he's perfectly happy to have an arranged marriage. His mother has introduced him to a family member that he thinks he's going to marry. And I'm thinking, a family member, really? Are you not capable of choosing a partner for yourself outside the family?
I think it's probably difficult to relate to it, but I guess it's not something that is difficult. I mean, for many Muslims, not just Muslims, I think it's a cultural practice. But for me, I mean, I think as long as the person feels that they have made that decision as an informed one, they've taken the time to get to know the person, they feel confident about the decision, then why not? Plenty of people I know, their mothers and fathers had arranged marriages, and 40 years on, they're still together, still tolerating one another, but certainly they do work. I think it's the force part of it, and maybe it's the mystery side. That is this. It's the idea that, I think, I'm not here to defend arranged marriages. I'm the Secretary General of the MCB, but I can understand, where the caller's coming from, and the idea, like I said, it's not an all or nothing thing. There's plenty of nuance. There's plenty of good examples and bad examples, and everybody has a choice. I guess you never know where love is.
Well, that's a very positive way to end the phone-in. Thank you very much indeed, Zara. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you over the last hour, and I think we'll have you back very soon, because I sort of feel we've done a lot, but we've only really scratched the surface.
We've only just begun, haven't we?
We've only... No, I won't sing. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, in the next hour, we are going to turn our attention to International Holocaust Memorial Day. I want to ask, what does this day mean to you if you are Jewish? What does it mean to you if you are not Jewish? And I do want to point out, obviously, that there were many, many groups of people who were gassed in the gas chambers in the Holocaust, but the overwhelming majority of them were from the Jewish faith. I'd like to hear from you if you've been to visit one of the concentration camps. I've been to 3, and it is... Well, I nearly said it's not an experience I would want to repeat, but I did repeat it 3 times, and because I think if you are in the area of a concentration camp, it's kind of almost your duty to visit it in a way. What was your experience? What did you take away from it? Because as Zara just said, we keep being told never again. But it is again, isn't it? It's still happening nowadays, not maybe in the same way, but there are all sorts of groups all over the world who are being discriminated against and worse. And of course, Jews are still experiencing discrimination. Why is that still happening in 2022? You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the government's announced plans to withdraw support from job seekers to try to fill 500,000 vacancies and to also help ease the cost of the living crisis. Boris Johnson says solving the workers' shortage will help. Benefits, though, would be lost unless they widen their job search after 4 weeks rather than the current 3 months. Our Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish says it's a contentious issue.
Labour's effectively saying, look, the government needs to be doing more in terms of training and skills and apprenticeships to help people make the most of their talents and abilities and their experience, rather than just shoehorning them into work in any job, however unskilled they are for it, however low paid, however potentially unenjoyable it is for them.
Police forces in England and Wales recorded the highest ever number of rapes and sexual offences in a 12-month period up to September last year.